We're live on YouTube. Hi, friends on YouTube. We are doing office hours. And if you aren't familiar with the office hours, well, then let me tell you. Office hours is your opportunity to ask me questions about anything, and I will do my best to answer them. Can't promise that I will always be able to answer them well, but I do promise to try and do my best, provided you follow the code of conduct, of course. I totally ignore the YouTube live chat, so yeah, don't bother asking there. I also pretty much ignore the Zoom chat, so don't ask me there. Where we do this is in Discord. So you can find that at kcd.im/discord. And here it is. And you ask in the KCD Office Hours channel. So let me just post this. And this is the last time I'm going to notify. This is the last time I'll notify this role. Here's the YouTube live stream. And you can find the Zoom link at the office hours page here, and you can join. And I give priority to people who are actually in the Zoom meeting. So if you have a question you really want to get it answered, then be there. And that's everything for my intro. So we do have plenty of questions that are queued up here in Discord. But does anybody have questions in Zoom first?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Jack.
Hi. This is exciting. I'm really enjoying both your React testing and Epic React courses. I saw something that I ran into, like a really strange problem that I'm not sure if is a product problem or like an engineering problem, but I thought it'd be a cool engineering problem. Basically, I was curious about importing a package that may or may not exist for essentially like an API user. So like I kind of put a proof of concept as best as I could.
Yeah.
And I saw that you had a related issue a while ago about including and excluding by file path. I think it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Was that like a Webpack thing?
Yeah. It was basically like iterating through your entire files. Or like if it was src / something something, then it would iterate through every src file. And so basically, I was able to, in this kind of proof of concept, and I could walk through it if it's helpful, but it's just very simple. I was able to get to dynamic lazy loaded file to work, components to work, but I couldn't get packages, which was interesting. And I wasn't sure of what you kind of thought or if this was something that you'd run into. I can imagine this being a problem for peer dependencies in like the NPM 6 idea of peer dependencies, but I wasn't totally sure. But yeah, curious if you have any
Well,
ideas.
so the reason that it's not working for packages comes down to how this works. So I'll explain that really quick. When Webpack comes across, I'm guessing you're using Webpack, right?
Yeah.
Correct. So when Webpack comes across an import statement like this, it doesn't execute that import statement in the browser. It transforms it into something for Webpack to dynamically import it. But remember that Webpack is responsible for bundling stuff, and then we have these JavaScript files that we can then send to our CDN or whatever. And when you anytime you do a dynamic import, Webpack has to say, based on the file structure right now, what are the possible things that they could import? Because I need to make sure that I have a chunk ready for them when they import that specific thing. And so what that means is that it takes all the information that it can from the path that you've given it, and it identifies any possible chunk. And so normally you're going to see stuff like import source, plus thing or whatever. And so then it's going to say, oh, okay, I'll just take everything that's in the source directory and I'll make a chunk for every single one of those so that I'm ready for whenever they try to import this thing. So when you do something like this means that literally every single individual file is going to get chunked. And not just that file, but also its dependencies. And Webpack does a bunch of things to try and make that optimal, but you're probably not going to be in a super great situation here from a build time perspective, as well as a code loading perspective. So you do want to typically be more specific, like putting all of the files that you want to possibly import into like a importable or whatever like that, so that Webpack says, oh, okay, so it's just the files that are in these directories. Maybe that's 10 or 12 files. We'll make a chunk out of each one of those and we'll just be ready if that needs to happen. So the reason that it's not working with dependencies is I'm guessing this, I didn't write this or anything, but I'm guessing that Webpack decided, I'm actually surprised that this works at all. I see that you get a critical dependency warning. I've seen this warning before, but I'm surprised that you said that this works. But basically,
oh, sorry, it doesn't import.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't work. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, good.
It throws back not found.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason that doesn't work is because then Webpack would have to basically make a chunk for literally every file in the project, including everything in node modules, which is just, it's a non-starter. That's not going to work. So yeah, there are a couple of solutions for you though that kind of depend on what your use case is. So can you explain to me what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So essentially, I work at a company that develops packages, that develops components for clients to use in a monorepo, essentially. And so they can pick and choose what components within the monorepo, what packages, components they want to use within their own monorepo. And the different components have to be independent of each other, if that kind of makes sense. So for instance, if you picked a video player component and you wanted an ad integration, for instance, then you would have to include the ad integration component as well. But the video player should also work without the ad integration, essentially. And so we're basically building a composable monorepo for clients, essentially. And I'm one of the API developers for the monorepo in total. Does that kind of make sense? It's kind of like a proxy package JSON.
Okay. So I'm trying to envision what it is that you're talking about. So from the user's perspective, like, or the developer user who's going to consume these packages, what do I have to do to include these things? Like I add them to my package JSON and then I import them in my code, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's similar to a package JSON. It's kind of a custom bundler. It's essentially, like a JSON file, and you include the components names, packages. And so it's kind of like it acts a lot like a package JSON. If that kind of makes sense.
And is there like a script that I run to install these things?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where do the files go when they're installed?
They go in node modules, just like kind of basic setup of a package JSON. Yeah.
Do they have a package JSON as well, or is this
they do have a package JSON as well at the top level of the monorepo.
Okay, at the top level, but then within the sub directories they don't?
Yeah, exactly. Not that they can control.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of a tough problem. We've
so
worked
I guess,
a bit of a corner.
So I add it to this JSON file. It gets installed in my node modules, and then what do I do in my source code? To do I need to import these, or are they just made available?
You need to import them into, if you were trying to make your own component, essentially. And but for this to work, line 30 of the code to work, essentially, it has to, we're kind of assuming that they have either not or imported or not added one of the packages to their JSON file, or they have. I don't know if it's kind of a niche use case, but
it definitely, what you're describing is definitely niche. But
yeah.
I think that we can figure this out. So you're saying they don't have to import it explicitly, and that's why you need to do this?
Yeah, they
So like once they have this in that JSON file, and then they run their app, they don't have to actually import it to be able to use it. Is that what you're saying?
they have to import it like they do on line 30 if they want to use one of the like other blocks or other components within the system, within the monorepo.
What do you mean by one of the other components?
One of the other packages that they've specified in that
Okay.
JSON file.
So
So they still need to import it.
Is there a
but
reason they can't just import it like a regular import?
No, there's no reason, but we wanted to make it optional for people. So if they wanted this extra package, then they could use it on line 30. So like if you wanted an add integration, you could import it. But if you didn't, because they're just composing these components, they're not necessarily writing custom code for it.
I see. Okay, so what you're saying is you want to expose that's what this is. You want to expose a lazy code splitter component to say, hey, go get me this package, the React Confetti package, and that way they don't have to import it themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I've got, first of all, I would suggest that this is not a great idea. I would recommend that you just tell them you've got to import it. There's and they could do a lazy import like this. This would work fine if they specify the package name. You're not buying them a whole lot by giving this API to them. All this is doing is adding a layer of abstraction that doesn't provide enough value for its existence, and that's just my opinion. But that's so I wouldn't pursue this, but I can tell you that you can make this work. And you can make it work by precompile or by making this work at compile time. And so what you could do is use, I don't think that there's a reasonable existing macro for this, but you'd use Babel plugin macros to make this work. Which is a package that I created, and it's included in like Next and Gatsby and Create React App by default. It's pretty well known. And what it amounts to, here, let me just put a link to this in our Discord here really quick.
Sweet.
But yeah, well, there, you might, whether you can use this one or not, I'm not sure, but it could at least provide you some idea of what is possible. I have a macro. Oh, whoops, no, it's called import all macro. I have one that could serve as kind of an inspiration for you. But basically, it allows you to write code that compiles to something else. And it's basically a Babel plugin, except a pretty straightforward way to write a Babel plugin. And so all you would need to do is add the Babel plugin macros configuration to your Babel config. And then anytime Babel comes across an import that has a dot macro at the end, it's going to, this is during build time, it's going to call the function that you export as part of your macro. So their documentation is actually quite good, so you can go take a look at that. But basically, this is what import all macro does, is it allows you to pass a glob, and then what ends up in the browser, what's built, is all the like direct imports for everything that's that matches that glob. So that's probably not exactly what you need, because yours is going to be more dynamic. It's may have like runtime values and stuff. But actually, that's one of the main limitations that you'll run into, is you will not be able to, like, people will not be able to pass a variable to this, or something like that. Like they would have to say package name equals a string. They wouldn't be able to dynamically feed in values here. Well, they might be able to, that you might be able to make that work. Now that I think about that, but yeah, so this is not the direction that I would recommend going, but you should be able to make it work with a macro.
Cool. Well, thank you. Sorry if I got in the weeds, but I
No,
agree
that's
with
okay.
you about
It's fun.
on direction. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ken.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for your question.
Yep.
Cool. Anybody else here in Zoom want to ask before I go to the Discord questions?
Hey, Kent, I got a question.
Great.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, man. This is my first live. This is kind of exciting. And I got a question for you. I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So my first question is, what is your process for when you get stuck on a problem?
Oh, yeah. Did you ask that earlier?
Yeah, I did. And I did watch that video. I did answer some questions of, hey, if you're trying to build this, like what process do you use to build a certain thing? But my question is specifically on, here's a problem that I'm stuck on. What are my steps? Like, what do I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can witness it because I live stream my coding a lot. But yeah, that takes a long time to to watch those. So typically, like the first thing that I try to do is isolate the problem. Actually, you know what? Dan Abramoff, I think, wrote a blog post about what he does, and it describes what I do pretty well. Let me see if I can find it.
By the way, who's Dan Abramoff? You talk about
he's a member of the React core team.
Yeah.
Pretty popular dude. He created the first version of the React Hot module, or React Hot Loader, or whatever it was called. It's had like 6 names. I can't remember what it was called first. But yeah, so he created that, and then he really became popular when he made Redux, and then he's been working on the React team for, gosh, I think like 4 or 5 years now. Maybe longer. It's been a while. Man, I thought he did, but I guess not. So anyway, I like the number one thing is trying to find where the problem comes from. I don't typically try to just like change a million things and hope that one of those things is going to fix it, because what will happen is maybe the thing that you changed actually moves the problem somewhere else, and then you test and you're like, sweet, I fixed it, but then the problem's over here. So you want to figure out what is causing the problem, and to do that, you remove as much code as possible. So I just like the best way to do this is to try and reproduce your problem in a very small isolated example in a separate repo, or like a code sandbox or something like that. And sometimes it's very difficult to do because there are just so many moving pieces and stuff. And so if I can't make a minimal reproduction, then I just slowly remove things from the context of what I'm trying to debug, until like literally all that's on the page is the component that's acting up or whatever. Yeah, that's the main thing. Sometimes that's a little bit tricky to do, and so I spend a lot of time diving into node modules. I'll add console logs. Console logs are especially useful for when it's a timing issue, and so like stepping through a debugger you can't really see, or like there's, especially if it's asynchronous, things are just going in a specific sequence, then console logs help a lot. And you can actually, in the sources panel, here, I don't know, anywhere here, you can add a debugger if you right click that is a log point. And so then you can say, what's the value of n right here? And now anytime the code goes through there, you'll get the log of whatever you put in there, console log. So that can be kind of useful. They also have conditional breakpoints. And so I'll say like, the code runs through here a lot, but I only care about when n.title is bar or whatever. And then it will only do a breakpoint there, given that condition. So I do that a fair amount. Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does. I like the main thing, see where the problem is and remove things that are not part of the problem and try to isolate the problem and go through that.
Yeah,
I do like that.
that's important. Yeah, that helps a ton. And making a small isolated example also helps a lot. And in the process of doing that, you're not only reducing the amount of your code that is involved, but also dependency code too. So if you're using some library and your interaction with that library is acting up, but then you see that under the hood, that library is using another thing, then try to see if you can remove the library and find out whether it's the library's problem or something else. This is really useful for React testing library, actually, because it's actually a pretty thin wrapper, relatively thin wrapper around React DOM as far as the rendering is concerned. And so we get issues on React testing library all the time, like why doesn't, this isn't rendering properly, whatever. And the first thing that I would do is I'd take their example and I'd remove React testing library entirely and just use React DOM. And I'd say, yeah, it's not a React testing library issue. This is something else entirely. So yeah, trying to just remove as much as you can, that helps a ton.
Okay.
Yeah. Good luck.
Oh, thank you. Well, I do have another question.
Yeah.
So this is more of a career question. So let's say if you didn't have a job right now, okay, like a developer job, and you were going through Epic React, okay, you're learning React, what activities would you be doing to get hired as a React developer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I always said that if I didn't have a job, my job is finding a job. And so like I would work at least 8-hour days, probably more until I found a job. And so, yeah, the activities that I would do during that time, I would probably have like I have this notepad where I write down all the things that I'm going to do every day. And every single day I have a couple of things that are just on every day. And one of the things that would be on every day for me, if I didn't have a job, was applying. I would apply to at least one job every day. And then just trust in the process that eventually I'd get an interview somewhere and whatever. Even like just when I'm barely getting started, because you're better off having a job and getting on the job experience than just like waiting until you're ready to have a real job. I like forget that. Just work on applying. You don't have to spend ton. I wouldn't recommend spending all day applying to jobs and getting no experience. That will not work well, I think. But just apply every single day. Maybe you'll get lucky and you'll have somebody who says, "Hey, I see in you Moxie kid, and I'm gonna hire you even though you have no experience." Maybe you'll get lucky. That's why you're applying even without any experience at all. That's why I would apply without any experience at all. It looks like we've got a bunch of people giving their comments too, which is welcome. Please share. And we do have this career channel that you can take conversations like this too as well. But yeah, so I would also have on there, since you mentioned Epic React, I would have do at least one exercise from Epic React every day. And then I would also have on there work on my side project, whatever that side project is. So, well, I guess it would not really be a side project if you don't have a job. It would be the project. but yeah, I would work on a project every single day. And I would have a specific thing that I want to accomplish. I notice with myself that a lot of times I will start working, or I will have a project, but I won't be sure what I want to work on. There's just so many things and I'll just get distracted by a lot of things. But I find that when I write down a specific thing that I want to accomplish, that is like accomplishable within the time frame, that I typically end up being more productive. So for example, today I have my Epic React workshops that I'm working on updating and responding to feedback and stuff. that I started going through all of the feedback. I have like over 2,000 lines of like, here's how this should be improved, or actually lots of them are just like, I love this. This is great. I enjoy those too. But yeah, so I'm going through all of those lines of feedback to improve the exercises a bit for the next updated version. And so, yeah, on here, I have finished the first workshop as my goal of what I want to get done today. So yeah, have a specific goal of the project that you have in mind, and then with whatever flexible time that you have from there, I would also actually have another item on my list is work on a blog post. You may not publish a blog post every day, but work on a blog post every day. Maybe even do some like how whatever works for you, but like some form of content creation, because
So
that is how you're going to solidify what you're learning. And
yeah,
so I would suggest I wouldn't suggest that. That's what I would do if I
yeah.
were in that position.
So with that, I was writing articles on like on each lesson that I was learning in Epic React. You probably saw some of the articles that I wrote. I was doing that, but it would take a couple hours, a few hours for me to write an article, and it would just take so much time to do it. And I was like, all right, so I'm writing these articles, but I'm not going through Epic React quickly enough. You know what I mean? It's like it's taking
yeah.
too
Well,
much
so
time.
it does take a lot of time. The fact of the matter is that learning takes a lot of time, and you can either do it like over the course of like when you're on the job and you're working on something and you don't understand it well enough, and so you spend hours because you don't understand it well enough. And so
Yeah,
that's where the time can come from, or it can come up front by spending the time to really learn and understand this stuff. And by spending that time up front, you can speed yourself up later. So I appreciate that it takes a lot of time. That's not lost on me. I spend a lot of time on blog posts and stuff. And that's the thing too, is like, you don't have to write a blog post on every exercise. You don't have to, and it doesn't have to be a big long thing. That's actually one of the reasons why Epic React is the way that, or why I have the elaboration and feedback on every exercise. And I actually recently changed that a little bit. So I'll just show you. If you look at the updated version of all the workshops, there's this new section called Your Notes, because we had this feedback form. Oh, and another thing that people are going to love is all of these links now open in a new tab. I got so many complaints about
that's
that.
great.
Yeah. I at first I was disappointed because I can't do that in Markdown, and so I had to do some weird things to make that work. But when I realized, oh, I can't do that in Markdown. Oh well, people know, and they can hit Command and open it, but I guess not everybody knows that. So many people were like, please open it in a new tab. So now it does. But yeah, so we have the elaboration and feedback, and so you can put your comments in here. But I had enough people say, I really want to save these or whatever, that I thought, you know what, I'll just say, hey, every one of these is going to have this notes thing. And you just open up the Markdown file and type your notes in right there. So even if you're not writing a blog post,
Yeah,
at least elaborating on what you learn is the important part. You don't have to write a big long blog post or whatever, but at least try to describe to yourself, like teach yourself again, like in the future, what you learned in this exercise. And that will save you time on the back end when you're actually trying to implement this stuff, because you'll solidify your understanding of this. You'll know whether you understand it.
yeah.
Yeah, so those are the activities that I would be involved in. I'd probably get involved in open source too. One of the benefits, or one of the challenges when you're getting into coding, especially if you're not in a group or have a some sort of mentor or something, one of the challenges there is you're not certain that you're doing things right. You could be learning things wrong or whatever. And by participating in open source, you are providing an actual useful service to people by contributing to open source. But then they are providing code reviews for you. And so like you just are exposing your code to more people, technically for more criticism, if you want to think about it that way, but most open source projects are kind and they'll, they just give you free advice. And I think that has been invaluable to me. So that would be another thing that I would be involved with is open source. And I just put like, you don't have to spend hours and hours on all of these things, some of these things will just be a couple minutes, but I would just put these on my list every day and trust the process.
Yeah. So what I've been doing to gain experience is just finding my own clients and building websites for them, like Gatsby
That's great.
websites.
Yeah. That's even better than like
doing.
your own pet project thing, because it's an actual thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you, man.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Who's next in here? Are we good to go to the Discord or any other questions? Steve, I noticed that you're in here and you did mention some more trouble with the Firebase local storage thing. I think that we've kind of gone through or rehashed this enough that there's not much more that I can say about this. All I'm going to say, and this is just a repeat of last time, you can get out of sync if you store or if you cache in local storage, then you can get out of sync if one of these clients goes offline and then the other one makes a bunch of changes and then that client comes back online, it's going to be out of sync. So like that's the problem. If that's not a problem for you and you're happy with local storage and whatever, maybe this is just a little pet project or whatever, just go with what's working, yeah, don't even worry about it. It's fine. But that's just something to, that I consider. If I was like building this product as like a thing that I'm going to send it to people and have a bunch of users and stuff, there's no way I would go with trying to cache it in local storage. It's just more complexity than I would want, but go with what works. Ryan Florence is fond of saying there are two kinds of apps in the world, or two kinds of code or something. The kind that we ship and all the engineers are embarrassed about, and then the kinds that never ship. So like, there's not going to be a perfect solution. So it's more important to ship than to have it perfect, unless what you're shipping is like airplane control software or like medical software, in which case you probably want to make sure that's perfect. But a to-do list, who cares? Let's just make it work and be happy with it. Okay. By the way, anybody in the Zoom can feel free to interrupt. You have priority because you're actually here. But I'm just going to go through the Discord here now. So Jelte, I'm not sure how to say this name. Sorry. They're asking, in the tic-tac-toe exercise, there's a render square function inside the render that returns JSX. Yeah, I remember talking about this quite a bit. So I will just pull that exercise up. This is the React hooks. And we can go through this together. And I'm just going to reply here, answering this now. Maybe that'll kind of help find a timestamp or something. Okay, close all. Close all editors. We're on exercise 5, I think. Nope, 4. Here, and let's just go to this last one. So this is the code that they're wondering about right here. So what's going on here is we've got, well, actually, you know what? It's probably better to go with exercise or extra credit 2. Let's do that one. Yeah, here we go. And let me just pull up the actual demo. It's a tic-tac-toe thing. There are 8 squares. You click on, and they're buttons. You click on one and that changes it to an X or an O. Man, isn't it wild that we've gotten used to how long it takes to start a development server? Remix will make this much faster. And actually, there are lots of other projects that make this faster too, but like that's just the standard with Webpack. It's crazy. Okay, so we're on extra credit 2. So I click here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and boom, we get a winner. Okay, so each one of these squares though isn't all that like unique or special. The only uniqueness about it is when I click on it, I need to know which one it is, so that I know which one to fill in the X and the O. And when I'm rendering it out, I need to know which one it is, so I know whether to render an X or an O or nothing into it. And so that is where this render square thing comes in. And actually, I wonder, yeah, I start with render square. I wonder also if I've got this. Huh, that's interesting. I did not think that I gave that to you all. Yeah, I guess not. Can you all hear my kids singing? They're just like singing to each other. They're so funny. That's interesting. I did not think that I gave that to you as part of the exercise. I'll have to reevaluate that because I think it's good for your learning to go through that. Anyway, so like the natural way to solve this is just to have 3 of these, and then you'd have a 0 and a 0 and a 1 and a 1 and a 2 and a 2, right? But then you see that and you're like, oh, repetition, that's not good. And so maybe you'll make a component out of that or something. First of all, repetition is not necessarily bad. What makes me motivated to abstract this is I have this repeat of these numbers right here. That's not a big deal. Like I just say, oh, I got this wrong. Let's do 1 and 1 or whatever. Not a big deal. But the problem is that if you have a bunch of these, remember, we're going to have 9 of these total. So I'll have those there and those there. Now it's actually quite easy for me to make a typo and say, oh, this is or like I could do a copy paste problem or something like that, right? And then update only one of these. So by having those 2 numbers, which need to be the same, they absolutely, this is where it's saying I'm the one who was clicked, and this is saying this is the square that should be rendered here. Those 2 numbers need to be the same, otherwise you're going to be in a world of hurt. And so, like I said, the natural thing for people is to say, okay, well, let's make a function square and this is going to just be return this. And now what do we need to do? Okay, so we're going to need to have a handle click, right? Because we can't call select square. We can't pass I as the index. Here, well, actually, let's do this. Well, yeah, we'll try this first. So on click, we'll call it, and then maybe children makes the most sense, right? So children, and then on click. Okay, so we could pass that. Now that's interesting. We basically just built ourselves a button that has a class name. All right, so we could just say, take all the props. And this is functionally equivalent to what we had before, except maybe a little bit better because it allows us to pass even more arbitrary elements, whatever. But whatever we end up doing there, we've basically just replaced button with square. So we can do all of these are now a square. So we still haven't solved this problem. We're still passing that index in both places. So here's another solution that we could go with. What if instead, that's weird. What if instead we accepted the index and the squares and maybe select square? So this would actually work. This would solve our problem because we could say on click and then select square index and then squares index button. And so then down here we can say square index 0 and select square and squares. Got to spell it right. Won't work if you spell it wrong. Okay, and then you just do a bunch of those, and now you only have the one index to keep track of, and that would work. this totally, and just be a fine solution, sort of. I'm not a fan of it, but it would work. And it would sidestep the issue that I'm talking about here, where you have to keep those two numbers in sync. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that. So just because I don't like passing the squares and select square, like this component isn't really providing a whole lot of value. So then the next thing you could say is, well, okay, what if we put this square inside of here, and now we have access to the squares through the closure. So we just put it inside the component, and now we don't need to pass the squares. All we need to do is pass the index. So you say, okay, that's cool, because now we can just get rid of all that. And now that'll work. And technically it will work. It'll work fine. The problem is that when we call React create element with this square, which is what we're doing down here. So this React element or this JSX is going to be compiled into React create element with a index prop of 0. So these are functionally equivalent right here. Those two things identical. So what's happening is React is going to say, oh, cool, you want to create an element. Here's the blueprint for that element. It's the square function. And so I'm going to create that. And we'll mount it. We'll stick it into the DOM with this button, and that'll work great. Then we get a re-render, and we come back around and we say, okay, React says, here, I'm going to create an element. Here's the blueprint. Is that blueprint the same as the one that you gave me before? No, it's not. So I'm going to unmount the old one. We're going to throw that away, and we'll get this new one and we'll put it in. So your question might be like, wait, I thought it is like, it's just one function. But the fact is, because this function is defined within this function, anytime this function is run, we're going to have a new square function. So the old one still exists in memory, and we don't have access to it this render. But this new one is created every single time. And so what that means is that every single render, we're going to get an unmount of the old one and a new version, or like a new version of the same function. And that's necessary, right? Because the old function had the wrong select square and the wrong squares. It's hanging on to old variables. So we need a new version anyway. It wouldn't work if React did this any other way. And so yeah, so that's the result. And at the end of this workshop, end of the fundamentals workshop, I have a demo that shows you how keys work. And this will run into the same problem as specifying the wrong key, because React won't be able to manage the different like instances of state. So if this were to manage state inside of itself, focus also is kind of a state as well. And so if there was some focus in here, that would get blown away. So yeah, you do not want to ever define a component within another component. Now there's an exception to this. There's some, like I have done this, but you could use React use memo and just say, now this square, this is now my square component. But you'll notice that we have a warning right here saying, hey, you have some dependencies. And look at that. Now, select square needs to be memoized. So that's awesome. And then squares also is a dependency, which is the only state that gets updated. So even in this situation, even if you try to memoize it, you're still going to be stuck, because it's going to update this version of the square component on every render anyway. So this is just a non-starter. I have used React use memo before to define a component within here with dependencies that didn't change. I can't remember why I did that. It had something to do with lazy loading of some components or something. I think I removed it later because I found a better solution. But anyway, yeah, so this is pretty much not going to work ever. And anytime you memoize, like you use memo, then it's just a spider web effect of like everything needs to be memoized. So I typically try to avoid that if I can. So yeah, given that that's a non-starter, then the next best thing that you could do is you could say, hey, listen, I actually don't need this code to be within a component. I'm not using hooks within this function. All that I'm doing is I have some JSX that I don't want to repeat over and over because I don't want to repeat this index. And so we take that component that we had before, and we just we don't say React create an element, and instead we just call it to go get the elements. So here, remember, we had this before. And what do you do when you have some code that you want to abstract in JavaScript or in any language at all? You make a function out of it. Now in React, we typically just think, let's make a component out of it, but it doesn't have to be a component. If that component isn't actually using hooks or anything, all it's doing is returning JSX. Well, that component could just as easily be a function that returns JSX, and you don't actually create the element. Now, I've seen some people say, oh, well, we should just do this all the time because it's faster. And technically it is faster, but that's not the reason you should do this, because it's never going to be your bottleneck anyway. So don't do this just for the performance. Do it for the reason that we're doing it, and that is to avoid having these two numbers that you have to keep up to date all the time. So that is why we have this solution right here with just calling render square. We just say, hey, go get me these elements, and we have access to the squares here. We don't need to memoize this. It's not a performance issue or anything like that. And all that it's doing is making it so we don't have to keep these two numbers in sync, and we can just have a single number. So hopefully that answers your question. I know that Yago also answered, and yeah, hopefully that helped with that as well. And I don't know why I'm fixing this, because I could just say git reset, but well, there we are. So, cool.
Hi, Ken. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So let's say we have a function, we have a component which take a form. Yeah. Okay. And we want to test that form, but the form doesn't take on submit as a props, you know?
Sorry, one second. I just wanted to respond. This is a follow-up on that last question. Okay. Now you have my undivided attention.
Okay. Let's go. We have a component which has a little form in it. Let's say form. But the form doesn't take on submit as a props. It's internally in it. How do you test that on submit function?
Well, I'm guessing that you have some mechanism for specifying what should happen when that's submitted, right?
Yeah, right.
So your test should just make sure that thing happens.
Because all the examples I see is that they make a mock function and they use that, you know, they pass it as a props. But I never see an example where not passing on submit as a props and just handle submit is internally in the component.
Yeah, I don't, I can't speak to the examples that you see or you don't, but the principle is your test should resemble the way your software is used. And so whatever your component does in, or whatever you want it to do in production, your test should just make sure that it does that thing. Now, my guess is that when it's submitted, you're going to make an HTTP call and to submit the data. And in an end-to-end test, that's great. Go ahead and just make sure that HTTP call is made. You don't even have to assert that the HTTP call is made. After that happens, you're probably going to get some confirmation that something was successful or whatever. And all you need to do is assert that that confirmation shows up or whatever. But in an integration test, like a UI integration test, you're probably not going to want to make the network call. And so then you use MSW just to mock out that network call and make sure that things respond properly. Okay, so, and I show you how to do this in testing JavaScript as well as Epic React. But in testing JavaScript specifically, I was just thinking about in here, I show how to mock HTTP requests with MSW and the code. Here, let's watch it together. No, just kidding. The code, the code on GitHub. We have this component here that has an on submit, and it's calling load greeting. Oh yeah, so here's your example. Exactly. It's calling load greeting for input, which is a function that calls this load greeting endpoint. So we have no mechanism for passing a mock function to this on submit, and that doesn't matter. That's not even what we want anyway. What we do instead in our test is we just render that. We fill in the form. We click on the or we submit the form, and then we just wait for whatever response we want to have happen. And we're using MSW here to mock out any HTTP calls that happen in that case. So yeah,
that's exactly what we wanted. Thank you.
yeah, good. So here's a link to that. Yeah, if you want to get really serious about testing, then testing JavaScript's really good. And Epic React has some really good testing stuff in it as well. So
yeah, I saw the Epic React one. That was great.
Cool. Sweet. Anybody else in here have a follow-up or questions? Okay, cool. Now I'll just keep on scrolling through this thing and answering questions that have been asked. Here we go. Mert is asking how to create a workflow in a full stack application in the React side while you're building the app yourself. Is there architecture guidelines? Internet seem to not have good info. Yeah, so here's the problem just in general about like when you get to these more advanced or complex, especially architecture things where there's not as much information on the internet, it's harder to create that stuff and harder and also more niche because everywhere is going to have a different take. You're going to have different engineers with different opinions. And so, yeah, it's harder to create that sort of content. So that's why that content doesn't exist. Yeah. Are there guidelines? Yeah, I guess I haven't searched for them. And given that you have, I guess you know more about that than I do. I'm guessing the answer is no, at least none that you could find, none that I could recommend. Yeah, I don't know. Like this is why consultants get paid the big bucks because they come in, they get an understanding of the needs, and then they can provide you with a good architecture and stuff. That's something that I could do, but I don't want to spend my time doing that. So I'd rather spend my time building React courses and stuff. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, that's kind of a non-answer. Right, sorry. That's not very helpful. Okay, so next question, is cloning hard or popular projects the best way to improve yourself? Yeah, so I actually really like cloning existing projects as a mechanism for learning because if your goal is to learn how to code a specific thing, then cloning something's great. If your goal is I want to make product decisions and invent features and stuff, then making your own thing is great. But I'm guessing that your goal is like you want to increase your coding abilities, and if you just go and build create something all on your own, then you're going to spend a lot of time making product type decisions and going down different paths and stuff that aren't going to necessarily help you improving your code. But by cloning something like a Twitter or something like that, then all those decisions are made for you, and you just say, "Oh, I just need to make this thing." So that's I like that. Now, I should have prefaced all of that by saying I never did this because I always had a product or like some idea, some project that I wanted to build myself. But if you can't think of something, then yeah, cloning something I think is and I've heard of success. I'm not just telling you something like, go try this. Good luck in the forest by yourself. I've heard people have done this and it's been helpful for them. So yeah, so I can recommend it. Should junior React developers start writing TypeScript immediately if they want to get more projects with these? I wouldn't say that you have to learn TypeScript immediately. I'm typically of the opinion that the most important thing is to just ship something, have some experience with that rapid iteration. And you really, especially as you're getting started, you really want to have some positive reinforcement and like something to get you excited about, like show your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your mom or whatever, your dad or your dog, whoever, show your stuffed animals something that you created, because that will help you get going. And by having something actually created rather than just playing around in tutorials all day long, you get yourself exposed to more problems, because when you're following a tutorial, it's more rare that you'll run into the unexpected, and you'll have to yeah, so you learn a little bit less when you're just doing tutorials all the time. So yeah, I would layer TypeScript on. Let me back up. So that's what I recommend in general. Now, if you want to solidify your understanding of specific things, that's when you go back to the fundamentals and you say, okay, so I've played around with this stuff, but I really want to understand how JavaScript works or whatever. So that's when you go to the fundamentals and you start learning the total basics. There's a mistake in our industry where sometimes people will say, you can't be a real JavaScript developer if you don't know how to do X or whatever. And I think that's bogus. You're a developer if you want to be, if that's what you say you are. I don't care. That's great. And so, yeah, like sometimes people just get bogged down by the fundamentals. And this actually almost happened to me when I was starting coding. We were like building linked lists and stuff like that. And I was like, why would I ever do that? Who cares? And it wasn't until I actually started building products or building software to solve problems that it finally like, oh, that's software is actually kind of interesting. So yeah, you want to avoid just getting bogged down by fundamentals. So anyway, once you decide, okay, no, I want to really harden up and solidify my understanding of these things, then focusing on fundamentals can be helpful. And I would start with just JavaScript so that you can draw a box around that abstraction, like what features JavaScript has. And then you can kind of get into TypeScript and see what features TypeScript adds. The reason this I think is important is because then you can separate the TypeScript from the JavaScript and you'll understand them both better. If it's all just like a mix of things, then it's harder for you to, when you run into a problem, it's harder for you to know whether I should Google this as a TypeScript thing or as a JavaScript thing. So having a better understanding of the different boxes, I think is useful. Okay, so last question. Should a junior developer who has known all around full stack with JavaScript specialize in one end for better results after this point on? Full stack all the way seems burning out and feels lessening success ratio. Yeah, so I think there's the mythical full stack developer. They do exist sort of, but like, I mean, if you're talking full stack, you're talking database all the way to, you know, accessible user interfaces. And that's just a very broad range. And we're also talking DevOps, like deployment, all of that stuff. It's just such a broad range of capabilities. And I think I can't really speak to the polyglot approach because that's not my approach. My approach was very focused on mostly front end, but I do plenty of like tooling and a little bit of back end with Node, but mostly front end and all JavaScript. And that has worked out really well for me in my career. So that's what I typically recommend, is like just find a focus. The other thing to keep in mind is the back end is constantly getting commoditized. So you can buy a back end. You know, we've had Firebase for many years, and there are a lot more competitors in that space now too. And so that's why, like, I think that the front end is going to be one of the last things to get as commoditized as our back end services have. And so that's why focusing on the front end can be quite useful. Now, with frameworks like Remix or Next, you are writing back-end code. Like, this is server rendered, but all of, like, a lot of the time and increasingly, those pieces of back-end code are just interacting with other third-party services that are further downstream. And also, when, like, in every company I've worked at, we always had back-end engineers who did that stuff, and we would just hit their APIs. So even if you do, like, I think it's useful to have some idea of Node versus the browser. But yeah, I've had a lot of success just focusing on mostly front end. Okay, cool. So it is now 10:30. This happens every week. I think I'm going to call it office hour and a half. But yeah, I can keep going on this. We have, oh my gosh, lots of comments and stuff. Hopefully those aren't all questions. I might have to push this off till next week. Also, by the way, Bala does have a meetup, and Bala also has lots of really great ideas. And you all can schedule your own meetups and answer each other's questions too. So if you are tired of waiting or don't want to hear from me, then you can ask each other. This is what I get for switching from twice a week to once a week. That's probably what this is. Okay, so as a junior developer, how can I strategically plan and structure the project idea in my head into a scalable, maintainable app? Boy, that is, find the answer to that question and you will be a rich person. Yeah, I don't know. I think that sometimes we make a mistake by planning too much into the future, where like, you know, I mean, like it's hard to accomplish really big, audacious goals without planning into the future a little bit. But so long as you you have that in your mind and you can identify things that can get you closer, like from where you are to that point eventually, is fine. So like if I were to say I'm going to go and build Facebook, and Facebook's problems include this, that, and the other, and so I'm going to need these tools to solve those problems, I would spend all of my time trying to make those tools work for that level of scale, and I would never actually get to the point where I get to any scale at all. And so you need to acknowledge the fact that I don't need to solve the problems I don't have yet. I need to solve the problems I have now. And what do I need to do to get to the next point? So do the next right thing, Frozen 2 reference. Whatever is the minimal amount of work that you need to do to get to the next place. And then you will experience problems. You'll never stop experiencing problems. Facebook has problems, Twitter has problems, like Google has problems. You're never going to stop. And so don't pretend that you can solve all of the problems that you're going to have sometime in the future. You will never get there. It will never, you will never not have problems. So just solve the problems you have now. And then when you get new problems, that's great. You can solve those problems. Now, there are like, you don't want to paint yourself into a corner or anything. So having that big, hairy, audacious goal that you want to accomplish one day is useful. But make sure that you temper that with acknowledgement of those problems aren't mine yet. So I'm just going to solve the problem that I have today and acknowledge that I haven't solved the problems that I'm going to have because I don't even know what they are. Hopefully that helps. So the question about adding mentorship to the community. So here's my thoughts on mentorship. I technically had a mentor when I was an intern, but like in general in the software world, I never had an official mentor. And I know some people have had those types of relationships and they've been great for them. I just don't really think that's the right way to go about things. Like the way that I went about things is I would just work on things. I'd participate in open source. I would learn from other people. And like the internet became my mentor. So I don't know, like I'm not exactly sure how mentorship would work. Like we could have like a mentorship where people sign up and whatever. It just doesn't seem like it's a sustainable thing. So if you want to make an unofficial or make an official mentorship thing or something, like I'm definitely open to suggestions. As far as I can consider this, like it would just really be a channel where you can sign up to be a mentor or say, hey, I'm willing to be a mentor. And then a bajillion people come to you and say, please be my mentor. Like that's just how it always works. There's always more people looking for mentors than there are mentors. I will not sign up to do that. I get asked to be a mentor a lot and I always say no. I don't have the time to do it. But yeah, so if you find a mentor, but then I don't really see a space in the KCD Discord for like special mentorship or something. So you would take this into like a private DM on Discord and continue the relationship there. And that's fine. And if you want to do that like in a general channel, or if you want me to make a channel for that, then I'm to facilitate that sort of pairing, then I'm happy to do that. I don't know. Yeah, like I see that there can be a lot of value in having a person tell you what to do. I just never really had that myself. And so I guess I can't Yeah, I never had an official mentor relationship in a coding environment. So I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, second objective can be achieved through meetups. I agree. Okay, let's see if we can wrap this up. Damien, I noticed that you asked the same question in Bala's meetup, so I'm going to let Bala handle that one. And talked to Naresh about this one. Let's see. How do I approach a new React project? Yeah, well, so that kind of depends on how quickly it needs to be released and everything. When I was at PayPal, this is the last like big, real big new project that we got. We were going to rewrite PayPal Me from scratch. We had a couple meetings to talk about what the requirements were and everything. We had a pretty good idea. We had designers mock up some designs for us, and then we got started. And by this time, I had been working on PayPal scripts, and so we just installed that, and we were off running. It was awesome. It was a really great proving ground for PayPal scripts. So yeah, I would strongly advise using a framework, not trying to like hand roll your Webpack config or whatever. That would just be a silly thing to do in 2021. Get things running locally, get them deployed as quickly as possible to some environment, so you can get that build pipeline done. Get your testing infrastructure set up. And like I'm really bad at hack night projects or like prototypes, because I want to have all of this stuff in place for a long-term maintainable application. And so like whenever we would have hack nights, I would always, I wouldn't ever have anything to show other than, well, I got my testing and everything running like on CI and it's awesome. But like, I guess that's not what you do in 4 hours for a hack night. So yeah, like if this is something that's going to be a prototype, then you probably don't want to do that stuff and just like go as fast as you can. You wouldn't even like want a storybook or anything like that. And in fact, I wouldn't even bother separating things into components. Just make it one giant component and only separate the things when you absolutely have to. I actually do have a blog post about this that talks about why we separate or break things up into multiple components. So to see how far you can get without breaking things up into multiple components, because you'll just move faster that way. Like breaking things up into multiple components is good for maintainability, but bad for speed of delivery. So you want to see how far you can get without breaking things up. Don't worry about the, like if you're prototyping, don't worry about the files, just source directory, here's all my files. and those files are as long as they possibly can be. When it's prototyping. If it's like a big application like that you're gonna need to maintain in the long term and stuff, I still am not wild about separating things into a million files. I don't think that's the right approach, but yeah, try to co-locate things, get your pipeline set up. I don't know, hopefully that sort of helps. Yeah, and having like a component library, if you don't already have a component library and this is a project that is going to be big and stuff, then I would probably get started on a component library. Yeah, I don't know, hopefully that's helpful. I don't know how to do this. Sorry. Okay, cool. Let me just speed on through these. Here we go. We got a question. You use Redux. Congratulations. Should I call an API via a Redux dispatch action directly in an event handler or state handler? Yeah. Set a state in a handler and make it in a use effect. Yeah, so here's the problem with whether it's Redux or anything else. Here's the problem with making your network requests in event handlers. It's basically impossible to deal with race conditions and cancellation. So yeah, that's like, it's basically a non-starter. So the other thing to consider is if you can start getting away from Redux for managing your server cache, that would be great. Just use React Query, and like you won't even have questions like this. It just removes the question. They manage all of that for you. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah, so in general, I would recommend having side effects happen in use effect. I'm not a fan of putting side effects in event handlers, typically. Sometimes it's sort of useful, but mostly it's just a hack. Yeah, so in general, I would say use React Query. That's a good solid approach. Remix removes the question entirely because it manages all this for you, and it's awesome. So if you want to try Remix, but yeah, moving from Redux to React Query is a lot more straightforward. So yeah. Okay, just looking for questions here. Thanks for all the comments. It's fun. Making a reusable component. I have a talk about this. Let's see. What is it called? Simply React. There you go. So go ahead and give that a look, and yeah, good luck. How do one should go about making form inputs reusable and avoid re-renders? Yeah, I think actually this that talk will probably help that too. Those are great questions, Emma. Yeah, I love that. Or great question to ask yourself. Okay. Pattern recommended to hide some parts of the UI based on roles. Yeah, I thought I saw somebody ask this question, somebody else, somewhere else in the Discord, but I don't think it was you. So yeah, the easiest way to hide things in the UI is to just not render it. I see a lot of people will like have a higher order component or something that says, if this is rendered and these conditions are met, then redirect the user or something. Well, you don't need to redirect the user if you just don't render that route. And that's kind of what I try to communicate in this authentication and React applications. You can do the same thing with based on the user roles. So here we just render. Now this, if you're doing server-side rendering, then you'll know that the user's logged in. But if it's all client-side, then this is useful to say, let's wait till we get the user's data. And then we can provide it into the provider. And then right here, we say use user. And then here's our different parts of the app. Now, the unauthenticated app, we know there's no user over there. But you're talking about roles and stuff. So that would be part of the authenticated app. And actually, this comes from the Bookshelf app. This code comes from that. And if we look at our authenticated app, then there are a bunch of routes right here. Now, because we have a user, we can say use user, we'll get the user and we'll know what roles they have. And we know which routes we can render based on those roles. And that's just how I do it. Just not render the routes that, that the user can't see. So that's what I would suggest. Okay. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm just trying to find questions amidst all this wonderful conversation. Okay. And if I miss anything, I apologize. What do you think a junior dev should know for their first role? So yeah, it really depends on what your role is, like what job you're getting, what they expect you to do on the job. Yeah, I don't know. I can't really answer that question because I don't know. It depends on what you're getting hired for. As I said earlier, I don't think that you should wait until you know a certain amount before you go start looking for jobs. If I didn't have a job and I decided I'm going to get into coding, I would immediately start applying for jobs, just sending resumes and stuff. And maybe you'll get lucky and say like, yep, I think that you show promise and I know you know nothing, but we will teach you and whatever. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you won't. So like, there's not really a downside to applying, and maybe you'll get an interview, and even if you bomb the interview, at least you know what it's like to interview. So yeah, I think that's where this question is coming from, is like, what should I know before I start applying? Start applying now. Yeah, that's what I would do. Okay, so thanks, Emma. That's actually like, that's kind of what I when people ask me if I'll be their mentor, like I mentor everybody through my blog and my courses and stuff. I don't have time to mentor a single person. Not that I think that that's like a bad thing to do, but I just don't. I've chosen to mentor in mass, I guess. Sorry, my kids are starting to yell at me. Luckily, we're toward the end here, so let me finish up, and then I gotta go see what's going on. Is compound components the most used advanced React pattern? I don't see render props being used much. Yeah, so I don't actually teach render props anymore because I don't think it's useful most of the time. There are uses for it, and I have a blog post about that, but I don't find it all that useful compared to just custom hooks. So yeah, compound components probably the most used advanced React pattern, I think. There are a couple that I'm going to start adding, or at least one that I can think of, and that's a like I actually I have a blog post. These kids are shouting at me. Where is it? Did I put it on here? Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, so I'm gonna turn this into a pattern on the advanced patterns workshop, because there are use cases for both of these, and so I'm gonna come up with one of those and make an exercise out of that. I do see prop getters in the wild sometimes, and yeah, let's see what else. I don't really see higher order components much anymore. Yeah, compounded components are definitely the most common that I see now. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, that was fun. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, you can look forward to office hours next week, same time, and we will see you all in the future. I'm gonna go figure out. I think somebody broke somebody's balloon. That's what